The rain fell in heavy sheets that night, painting the streets with a cold silver glow. Inside the crumbling old house on the edge of the village, screams were swallowed by thunder. A woman's cry, desperate and fragile, broke through the storm, but no one came. No one ever came. Everyone knew what happened behind those walls, yet fear chained their tongues. She was his wife, bound him not by love but by cruelty, and each night he unleashed his rage upon her until her body trembled and her soul withered. Her name was Amara. She had once been full of light, the kind of woman who could make wildflowers bloom with her laughter. But years of torment had stolen her joy, reducing her to silence and shadows. Still, even in her silence, there was something he could not kill, a quiet strength that smoldered like fire hidden beneath ashes. Her husband, Malik, believed himself untouchable. His fists were his law, his voice the thunder in the house. He would stagger home drunk, the smell of cheap wine and smoke clinging to him. And with every step, Amara's heart would race with dread. He thought she was too broken to fight back, too afraid to leave. But he never realized that even the weakest bird will spread its wings when the cage door cracks open. Then one night, everything changed. Malik came home late, the storm raging outside, and slammed the door with such force the wooden frame cracked. He barked her name, his voice echoing through the empty hall. But silence answered him. The pot on the stove had long gone cold. The bed was neatly made, and her few belongings were gone. No letter, no trace of struggle, no sign of her. She had vanished like smoke in the night. At first he laughed, convinced she would return, crawling back like a beaten dog. But as the hours stretched into days, his laughter soured. The neighbors avoided his gaze, whispering when he passed. The police asked too many questions, and though he blustered with lies, their eyes lingered on him with suspicion. But the true horror began not with the questions, nor with the silence of the house. It began with the knocking. At midnight, a soft, deliberate knock echoed on the door. Malik stumbled from his chair, half drunk, half angry. When he opened it, no one was there. Only the rain-soaked road stretched into darkness. He cursed under his breath and slammed it shut. Yet when he turned, he froze. The hallway mirror, cracked from one of his drunken rages, held not his reflection but a fleeting glimpse of Amara's face. Her eyes hollow, her lips moving as if whispering words he could not hear. He stumbled back, blinking, and the image was gone. The next night, it happened again, and again. Each time, the knock grew louder, the whispers clearer. His sleep was shredded by dreams of her standing at the foot of the bed, bruises still marking her skin, her eyes glimmering not with sorrow, but with something far more terrifying, vengeance. Soon, Malik could no longer tell where the dreams ended and reality began. Doors creaked open by themselves. Shadows stretched across the walls in shapes that seemed too familiar. Her perfume, faint and floral, lingered in the halls though every window was sealed. He began locking every door, every window, yet still he felt her presence, pressing closer each night. And then came the night when he found the first message. On the wall, scrawled in something dark and wet, were the words, "You thought I would never leave." His knees buckled. He scrubbed the wall until his hands bled, but the words would not fade. They seemed carved into the very wood of the house. The once proud, arrogant man was reduced to a trembling shadow of himself, pacing through the halls, muttering her name, begging the silence for forgiveness. But forgiveness never came. Only more whispers, more knocks, more mirrors reflecting her face where it should have been. By the third week, Malik no longer stepped outside. He feared the stares of the villagers, the murmurs of the police, but more than that, he feared the house. Yet he could not leave it. Something chained him there, something that grew stronger with every nightfall. And then one stormy evening, as lightning split the sky and thunder roared, Malik heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps. He clutched the bottle in his hand like a weapon, his breath ragged, his eyes wild. The footsteps stopped at the bedroom door. The handle turned. The door creaked open. And standing there, her face pale as a moon, her bruises dark against her skin, was Amara. She did not speak. She only lifted her eyes, and in them, Malik saw every blow, every insult, every moment of cruelty he had ever inflicted reflected back at him like fire. His scream was swallowed by the storm as the lights flickered and the shadows closed in. Malik staggered back, his body pressed against the wall, as if it could somehow shield him from the figure in the doorway. His throat burned with a scream he could no longer release. He blinked, rubbed his eyes furiously, but when he opened them, she was still there, Amara, pale, silent, and watching him. Her presence was no longer the fragile woman he had once beaten into silence. It was something else, something larger than life, something that seeped into the very air he breathed. Her bare feet glided across the wooden floor, leaving no sound, but Malik swore he could hear the echo of her steps in his skull. His trembling hand raised a bottle, as if it could shield him, his knuckles white around the glass. "Stay back!" he shouted, his voice cracking like brittle glass. But she didn't move faster nor slower. She only tilted her head the way she used to when he lied to her face, when he swore the bruises wouldn't happen again. The storm outside rattled the windows, wind howling through cracks of the old house, yet all Malik could hear was the pounding of his own heart. He pressed himself tighter against the wall, shaking, feeling sweat roll down his face in hot streams. "You're not real," he muttered, his voice desperate. "You're not real. You can't be real." But as if in answer, Amara's lips parted, and from them came a sound that froze him to the bone. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even words. It was laughter, soft, broken laughter, echoing from a throat that had known too much pain. That sound shattered what little courage Malik had left. The bottle slipped from his hand and shattered across the floor, the sharp fragments glittering like teeth in the dim light. His knees gave way beneath him, and he dropped onto the broken glass, too numb to feel the sting slicing into his skin. Amara stood before him now, only an arm's length away. Her face hovered above his, and her eyes, those deep, once gentle eyes, burned with something unearthly. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying she would vanish. But when he opened them again, her face was closer still, whispering words he finally understood. "You thought I would never leave." His breath caught in his throat, a dry sob scraping from his chest. He clawed at the floor, tried to crawl away, but his limbs felt leaden. No matter how much he moved, it was as if the room bent itself to keep him in her shadow. Every direction led him back to her gaze. The storm outside wailed louder, lightning splitting the sky, casting her figure in flashes of white light that seared themselves into his memory. He dragged himself toward the door, shards of glass cutting trails of blood from his palms. But the door slammed shut with a deafening boom before he could reach it. Malik collapsed, whimpering like a child, every ounce of the tyrant drained from him. Behind him, her presence grew heavier, colder, until he could feel her breath brushing the back of his neck. He dared not turn, dared not face her again. His body shook uncontrollably, sweat mingling with blood. His teeth chattered as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Amara, I'm sorry." But the words sounded empty even to him. The house groaned, with creaking as though centuries of anger and sorrow pressed against it. The mirror in the hallway shattered with violent crack, though no hand touched it. The shards scattered across the floor, reflecting countless fragments of her face, each one whispering his name. Malik clutched his head, covering his ears, but the whispers seeped through his very bones. Malik, Malik, Malik. The sound was endless, circling him, suffocating him. His breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurring. For the first time in his life, the man who had feared nothing now knew true terror. And still, Amara loomed behind him, patient, unyielding, as though she had all eternity to watch him crumble. He scrambled into the corner, curling himself up, his once imposing figure reduced to a shivering shell. His eyes darted around the room, searching for escape, for a reason, for something that could explain the nightmare. And then, as lightning tore open the sky again, his eyes caught a figure in the reflection of the broken glass on the floor. It wasn't just Amara. Behind her stood others, faces he recognized, women he had hurt, neighbors he had tormented, people whose cries he had ignored. Dozens of hollow-eyed figures stood in the shadows, their gazes locked on him, their silent judgment pressing into his skull. "No!" he croaked, shaking his head violently. "No, no, no!" But the whispers grew louder, not just Amara's now, but a chorus of voices rising into a dreadful harmony. They spoke not in anger, not in screams, but in calm, steady tones that carried more weight than fury ever could. Justice comes. You cannot hide. You cannot silence us. The room spun, his stomach twisted, bile rising to his throat. He clawed at his own skin, desperate to wake up, desperate for this nightmare to end. But no matter how hard he scratched, no matter how violently he pinched, he remained. His nails drew blood, streaks down his arms, but he was still trapped. And then he heard it, the sound that shattered him completely, the crying of a child, soft at first, then louder, echoing through the house. He froze, his eyes wide, breath caught in his lungs. He remembered, all too vividly, the night Amara had told him she was pregnant, how he had laughed cruelly, told her the child would be cursed to suffer as she had. He had forbidden her to ever speak of it again. She had wept silently that night, and he had never asked her why. Now, the sound of that child's cry rose through the storm, mingling with the whispers, piercing Malik's soul. His body convulsed with sobs, raw and pitiful. He buried his face in his hands, wishing for the darkness to swallow him whole. But the darkness did not grant mercy. Amara stepped closer, her cold fingers brushing his trembling shoulder. He flinched as though struck, but he could not move away. Her touch was not painful. It was far worse. It was steady, deliberate, reminding him that escape was no longer his to choose. Her voice, when it finally came, was no longer broken. It was clear, resonant, filled with the weight of everything he had ignored. You will never rest, Malik. You will feel what I felt. You will live in the cage you built for me. Every night, every shadow, every silence will be mine. And as the storm raged outside, Malik's scream finally broke free, echoing through the empty halls, swallowed by the sound of thunder, leaving the house trembling with the weight of a past that refused to die. His scream dissolved into hoarse sobs, echoing against the cracked plaster walls, until even the storm seemed to hush, listening to his misery. Malik collapsed fully onto the floor, his chest heaving like a cornered animal. The shards of broken glass beneath him dug deeper into his flesh, but he welcomed the pain. It was real. It reminded him that he was still alive, though every bone in his body wished he wasn't. The whispers didn't fade. They circled him like a cruel lullaby, steady and relentless. His eyes darted from one shadow to another, convinced they shifted and moved of their own will. Each flicker of candlelight stretched longer, curling like grasping hands across the room. He pressed himself tighter into the corner, rocking, muttering broken prayers to a god he had long mocked. But then the crying returned, the sound of the child. This time, it wasn't far away. It was in the very room with him, soft and shrill, tugging at the strings of his unraveling mind. He clawed at his ears until blood slicked his fingers, but the cry only grew sharper, piercing through him. He dared to lift his gaze, and there, on the bed that had once been his throne of cruelty, lay a small bundle swaddled in cloth. The fabric was stained dark, and yet the child within it moved, its tiny fists waving in the air, its wail filling every corner of the room. Malik's breath came in jagged gulps. No, this isn't real, it can't be. His voice was hollow, a ghost of its former power. He dragged himself toward the bed, each movement slow, reluctant, as though some invisible weight tried to drag him back. His trembling hand reached toward the bundle, and the moment his fingers brushed the cloth, silence fell. The crying ceased. The child's eyes opened. They were Amara's eyes, deep, endless, burning with that same quiet fire he had seen moments before in her apparition. But there was something more. They weren't the eyes of innocence. They were eyes that remembered, eyes that judged. Malik ripped his hand back as though burned. He stumbled, his back hitting the wall again, his chest pounding. The silence was worse than the cries, pressing against his skull like a vice. He whispered her name, Amara, half pleading, half cursing, his lips trembling. But the figure by the bed was no longer a child. The bundle lay empty, the sheets crumpled as though nothing had ever been there. And standing over it was Amara once more, her figure clearer than before. She was no longer pale and bruised. The shadows had receded from her face, leaving her tall, resolute, almost regal. She seemed stronger, her presence filling the entire room with authority that left Malik gasping for air. "You never thought I would rise," she said softly, though her voice carried like thunder. "You never thought I would be more than the pain you gave me. But you were wrong, Malik. You broke me. But in breaking me, you awakened something you will never defeat." He shook his head wildly, clutching at the floor as though he could claw a hole in it to escape. "Please, please, Amara, forgive me, forgive me." His voice cracked, reduced to begging. Her gaze did not soften. "Forgiveness is not mine to give. Not anymore." The room began to shift around him. The walls stretched higher, the shadows deeper, the floor tilting as though the entire house was sinking into some abyss. Malik scrambled like a trapped rat, his nails ripping against the wood, leaving bloody trails. He stumbled toward the window, desperate to fling himself into the storm, but when he peered through the glass, he froze. The village outside was gone. In its place stretched an endless wasteland, a barren plain under a sky split by lightning and swirling with black clouds. Figures dotted the horizon, shapes walking, limping, dragging themselves closer. Their bodies were twisted, their faces blurred, yet their eyes gleamed with the same fire as Amara's. They were coming, and every instinct in Malik screamed they were coming for him. He staggered back from the window, collapsing once more to the floor, his chest convulsing. "No, no, this isn't happening. It's a dream. It's a drink. It's reality." Amara finished for him, her voice sharp, cutting through his delusions like a blade. She stepped closer, her presence towering, and with each step, the temperature in the room dropped until Malik's breath came out in fog. He hugged himself, teeth chattering, shaking his head. "Why me? Why are you doing this to me? I was your husband." Her laugh was low, bitter, a sound that seemed to rise from the cracks in the earth itself. "My husband?" She spat the word as though it were poison. "A husband cherishes. A husband protects. You were no husband, Malik. You were my jailer, my tormentor, my executioner night after night." Her words lashed him harder than any whip. He wept openly now, his sobs loud and pitiful, his voice hoarse as he cried for mercy. But the figures outside were closer, their outlines visible even through the storm. The air trembled with their approach, the ground quaking beneath unseen feet. Amara leaned closer, her shadow enveloping him entirely. "You will never know peace. You will never close your eyes without seeing mine. You will never breathe without tasting the blood of what you did. And when they come," she gestured toward the window, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, "you will answer to every soul you have wronged." The whispers rose again, this time swelling into chants. The figures outside pressed against the glass, dozens of hands slapping the window in a rhythm that matched the pounding of Malik's terrified heart. He screamed, clawing at his face, stumbling across the room. He tried the door, the walls, the floorboards, but every surface melted into shadow beneath his touch. There was no way out, and then the door burst open with a crack like thunder. The storm rushed inside, rain soaking him instantly, wind howling so violently it knocked him onto his knees. But even as the storm raged through the house, the figures poured in, faceless shadows with glowing eyes, their forms bending and twisting as they closed in on him. Malik crawled backward, his screams raw, his eyes wild. He tried to fight, flailing his arms, but his fists passed through them like smoke. Yet their touch was real. Cold hands gripped his shoulders, his legs, his chest, pinning him down, pressing him against the floor. He shrieked, thrashing, his body writhing under their weight. "Amara, please, stop them, please." But Amara only watched. Her eyes were calm, unblinking, as though she had waited for this moment all her life. She lifted her hand, and the shadows tightened their hold, forcing Malik's face to the floor, pressing him into the shards of glass until his skin split open. His blood mixed with the rainwater, streaking across the boards like crimson rivers. Still he struggled, his body convulsing, his mouth choking on sobs and pleas. His words dissolved into incoherent screams as the whispers grew louder, echoing through every corner of the house, every crack of thunder, every flicker of lightning. And as Malik's cries grew weaker, Amara stepped closer, kneeling beside him, She leaned down until her lips brushed his ear. "This is only the beginning, Malik." The storm outside raged like the earth itself had risen to witness judgment. Every clap of thunder rolling with the weight of centuries of unspoken cries. Malik lay pinned beneath the crushing grip of the faceless shadows, his body trembling, his skin slick with rain, sweat, and blood. His voice, once a weapon he had wielded against Amara, was now reduced to broken pleas that dissolved into the howling wind. The house groaned around him, trembling as though it, too, was purging his presence, rejecting the years of violence it had been forced to shelter. Amara's figure stood tall in the center of the chaos, her presence unwavering. Her hair danced in the gusts of wind, her eyes alight with a glow that seemed to pulse with every lightning strike. She was no longer the beaten wife who once cowered in corners. She had become something far greater, an embodiment of justice, a spirit unchained, a voice for every silence that Malik thought he had buried. He turned his head toward her, his eyes swollen and red, his lips trembling as they formed one final plea. "Please, Amara, don't let them take me. You loved me once, didn't you? Please." His words, dripping with desperation, only deepened the silence that followed. For a moment, the shadows seemed to still, the wind to hold its breath, as if waiting for her response. Amara stepped closer, her bare feet leaving no mark upon the soaked, splintered floor. She crouched beside him, her gaze piercing into the hollow pit of his soul. "You mistake what I once gave you," she whispered, her voice steady yet heavy with power. "It was never love you earned. It was love you destroyed. You fed on my kindness until there was nothing left. You thought your cruelty would silence me forever. But even in silence I grew. Even in pain I gathered strength. And now, Malik, the silence you gave me will become the silence that consumes you." His face contorted, torn between rage and terror. He tried to spit words of defiance, but his voice cracked, crumbling under the weight of the storm. The shadows pressed harder, his body sinking deeper into the shards of glass, the sting tearing into him as if the house itself sought to devour him. He cried out, his scream swallowed by the chant of the faceless figures as they drew closer, their voices rising in unison, filling the air with otherworldly rhythm. The storm no longer felt chaotic. It was purposeful, every gust of wind, every flash of lightning aligned with the rhythm of the voices. The very elements themselves seemed to bear witness, to mark this moment as eternal. Malik's eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, but all he saw was the endless procession of faces in the shadows. Some he recognized, others he did not, but all carried the same unyielding fire in their eyes. Each figure represented a wound, a scar, a tear shed not only by Amara but by countless souls who had endured the cruelty of hands like his. He was no longer facing only her. He was facing a tribunal of every broken spirit he had mocked, every cry he had ignored, every ounce of humanity he had crushed. Amara rose once more, her figure radiating a calm that contrasted the storm's fury. She raised her hands, and the chanting grew louder, the figures closing in until Malik's body was all but swallowed in their mass. His voice reached its final peak, a scream so raw it echoed like a wounded animal. But his cries did not move her. Her voice rang clear above the storm. "Tonight, you do not die, Malik. Death is too kind for you. Tonight you live, but not as the man you were. You will walk among these shadows. You will hear their voices. You will feel their suffering, and you will carry the weight of what you've done for eternity. Every night will be the night you once gave me. Every silence will echo with the cries you ignored. Every reflection will bear my face, until you are nothing but a ghost of your own making." At her words, the shadows surged like a wave, rising high and then crashing down over Malik. He convulsed as the darkness consumed him, his scream splitting into echoes that seemed to travel far beyond the walls of the house. His body shuddered, his eyes wide with terror, as the faceless figures dragged him into their mass. His hands clawed at the floor, leaving bloody streaks. But the storm roared louder, drowning every last trace of resistance. Then, with a final flash of lightning, the figures and Malik were gone. The room fell into silence, save for the steady drip of rain through the broken roof. The floor was empty, the shards of glass glistening like tears in the dim light. Amara stood alone, the glow in her eyes fading into something softer. She turned her gaze toward the shattered mirror on the wall. For the first time in years, the reflection that stared back at her was whole, not the broken, bruised woman she once was, but the woman she'd become, unshaken, reborn, free. A small, knowing smile touched her lips, not a triumph, but a release. The storm began to ease. The thunder rolled further into the distance. The rain softened into a drizzle, and a pale light broke through the clouds. It fell upon the house like a blessing, seeping into every corner that had once been cloaked in shadow. The walls no longer groaned with pain. The air no longer carried the stench of despair. For the first time in years, the house breathed peace. Amara stepped to the doorway, her hand brushing the frame as though bidding farewell. She looked out, and beyond the broken village, the wasteland she had seen through the storm was gone. The world had returned. The dirt road stretching into horizon, the trees glistening with raindrops, the first hints of dawn glowing in the sky. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with air that no longer carried Malik's shadow. The voices that haunted the house for so long seemed to quiet, settling into silence as though their work was done. And in that silence, Amara felt something she had not known in years. Peace, not just for herself, but for all who had suffered unseen. She walked barefoot into the dawn, her steps light, her spirit unbound. Behind her, the house stood as a hollow shell of what once was, no longer a prison but a monument, a place where cruelty had been answered, where justice had awakened. The villagers, who had once averted their eyes, would speak of this night for generations, whispering of the storm that came and the man who vanished, and the woman who walked out stronger than any storm could break. And though Malik was gone, his scream lingered, echoing faintly in the wind, a reminder, a warning, a shadow carried into eternity. For some storms do not pass, they only change their shape. And in the silence after the storm, Amara's name became more than a memory. It became a story, a testament, a light that no darkness could ever silence again.